One or two people have been asking me for some more kind of basic material for beginners, if you like, or for people who are coming back to the piano after a long time away, which I know is quite a lot of people who are watching these. So I thought what I'd do today is talk about 3 little techniques, or 2.5 really, you'll see what I mean, for making your piano playing more smooth, more flowing. The reason I'm going to talk about this is because, and this is something I've mentioned before, a lot of self-taught pianists, or pianists who haven't had many lessons, often have quite a kind of clunky style, even if they get quite good. If you listen to a lot of sort of rock stars who taught themselves bits of piano, and Paul McCartney is the classic example, it doesn't quite have the kind of flowing smoothness that people like Elton John or Ben Folds, who have had the lessons, do have. That's not true of everybody. I mean, there's some great self-taught rock pianists out there. Amanda Palmer is a brilliant example. I don't think she had any lessons. But by and large, people who have had some sort of reasonably extensive classical training on the piano tend to have a much smoother sound. So I'm going to look at some of the reasons why that is, and also teach you these kind of 2.5 ways of making your sound a bit smoother. Okay, now that little twiddle I played at the start there was in the key of E flat major, and there's a reason for that, because E flat is a key that uses obviously quite a few black notes, usually E flat, A flat and B flat, but also some white notes as well. Okay. One problem that self-taught pianists often come across is that they kind of treat the keys like buttons. Okay, so you press this and this button to get a chord of E flat major, these buttons to get a chord of C, and all the rest. And it's not quite like that. And you especially run into problems if you're moving a lot between black notes and white notes, because these guys who treat the piano keys as if they're buttons tend to play the edge of the notes. Okay, they think, right, this is the button, this is where I press it, there. Okay, and in actual fact, you can use the full depth of the key, and you really need to get a smooth sound. This is something I've mentioned before, but I'm just going to demonstrate it again. If you look at what I'm doing here, just playing right hand twiddles, I'm digging really deep into the keys often, okay, especially if I'm travelling from black to white or white to black. Okay, so often if I'm playing a shape like that, I'm hitting that G right up here. Okay, so the first thing to do is to remember that as well as moving up and down the piano, you can move in and out. Okay, don't feel you have to be tied to these very end extremities of the keys. One problem that brings, which you need to get over, is because piano keys are levers, you need a different amount of force in each place on the key to get the same volume. So if you want to play a C there and an E flat here, you have to hit the E flat just with a little tiny bit more force to get the sound out. Okay, if you're hitting it there, obviously the lever's working with you, and you can use the leverage, and you don't have to use quite as much effort. So using the depth of the keys and getting an even and consistent sound isn't easy. The way to do that is to practice your scales. Okay, yet another reason for practicing your scales, because if you play all your scales all the way through, then you will handle, in the course of doing that just about every transition between a black note and its neighbouring white note there is. Okay, so practicing your scales will help the evenness, will help deal with the unevenness that you naturally come across if you're playing the full depth of the key. Okay, so that's tip number 1. Use the full depth of the key if you have to. Not always, but if you have to. Okay, so your hand should be moving this way as well as that way. Tip number 2 is what I call hand anticipation, and that is about, as you play a note, getting your hand ready to play the next note. Yeah. Now, if you have classical piano lessons, this kind of stuff is drummed into you. If you don't have classical piano lessons, chances are no one will ever tell you, okay? And it's drummed into you because to play classical music or Baroque music or whatever, you know, okay, that kind of thing, you have to be able to line up your hand in the right position. If you look what I did there, that was just the very first couple of bars of a piece of Bach, for Suite Number 1 from the French Suites. I'll just slow that down. Okay, I've got that C sharp coming there. It's part of the melody, it's really important. So look what I'm doing. I'm lining up my thumb, ready to go for it. Yeah? Again, a lot of people who have not had lessons might approach this like this. Okay, here I am on the D. Oh, now I need a C sharp jump. Okay, and that's where you lose the smoothness. So pretty much as soon as I was on the D, I could see that the next note I needed to play was C sharp, so my thumb was up there and waiting for it. Same thing was happening in the right hand. Let me slow that right hand down. As you can see, I've got that sort of awkward movement there. Whoops. Where I've got thumb and fifth finger, thumb on the G and fifth going onto the A, so I can come down here smoothly. Yeah. Now, the way I do that is as soon as I'm landing on the G, I'm moving my fifth finger down. Okay. Yeah. So the act of landing on the G is the movement is I'm making the movement of pushing down on the G exactly the same movement as moving that fifth finger down, ready to land on the A. Okay. Again, someone who taught themselves would take it more sort of step by step. Oh right, yeah, there I need to go, and there will be a gap. So getting ready for the next note is part of the process of playing the note you're playing. It's a bit like playing snooker or pool. You know, when you play a shot in pool, you're not just thinking about sinking the ball that you're aiming for, you're thinking about lining up for the next shot as well. And it's exactly the same with playing the piano. When you play one note, you're thinking about, or you should be thinking about, where you're going next. Now when you're improvising, clearly that's a little bit trickier. It takes a bit of practice because you're not necessarily sure what you're going to play next. A big part of improvising often is just playing the notes that fall comfortably under your fingers. So if you've landed there and suddenly you notice your pinky's up here and there's a C, you can do that. But if you want a particular sound, say I went over there from my thumb on the E flat down to the D flat. Whoops, hang on, let me try. Okay, and as soon as I'm hitting the E flat with my thumb, that thing is moving over. Okay, rather than, oh right, I'm there, now I need to jump all the way over here. Okay, so hand anticipation, it takes a lot of practice, but after you have practiced it and mastered it, it becomes second nature. Okay, so that's why it's worth, if you can, digging out, if you have piano lessons in the past, digging out those old books of Bach and all the sort of Purcell and sort of early Baroque music that you did, because that kind of stuff is really useful for doing this sort of thing. Because if you're playing and all that kind of thing, it's completely unforgiving of you getting your hands in the wrong position. Yeah, which is why you do it in piano lessons. So tip number 1: use the depth of the keys. Again, mentioned that before in earlier videos, but it's really useful. Tip number 2: anticipate where your hand needs to be. Don't just think about the note you're playing, but the next one you're going to play. Tip number 3, and I said 2.5 tips because this is really only half a tip, is listen to what you're playing. Now that sounds like a no-brainer. Obviously, you can't help but listen to what you're playing, or you can't help but hear what you're playing when you're sat at the piano. But the fact is, of all the instruments, it's actually really easy to play the piano and focus on the notes that you're hitting and not really concentrate on the sound that's coming out. With a lot of other instruments, if you're a singer or a brass player or a clarinetist, or especially if you're a string player, you have to listen to the notes you're producing to make sure they're right. The piano handles that for you. If you hit G, it's going to produce a G. It's not going to be slightly flat or sharp unless your piano is out of tune. But because playing the piano is such a complex process, in terms of using up brain space, often it's easy to just forget to listen to the sound you're producing. Okay, so when you are playing, have a listen. Yeah, if you find that difficult, and it can be surprisingly difficult, get out your phone, switch on your computer, whatever, and record yourself. Okay, playing a little bit of whatever, play it back and think, oh yeah, there's a little bit of a bump between that G and that F. How can I smooth that out? Well, you know, it's a case of when I hit the G with my thumb, getting the second finger over quickly to hit the F. So there we go. Use the full depth of the keys. Using scale practice to help you master that. Okay, that's yet another reason why it's worth playing your scales. Think about your hand anticipation. Okay, so if you've got a note here and your next note is down here, have a thumb or a finger ready to hit it, and listen to what you're doing. Okay, listen. You know, it's so important and so easy not to do. Okay, I hope that was kind of useful. As usual, I'll give you a little plug for my book, How to Really Play the Piano, the stuff your teacher never taught you, which has got loads of stuff about the basics of chords and improvisation and things. You need to be able to read basic treble and bass clef, okay, to get the most out of this. Don't worry if you're a bit rusty, because obviously there are lots of resources online that you can use to brush up. But if you can't read music, then you need to head off and learn how to do that first before you'll get anything out of this. But if you can read music and you want to start improvising and learning about chords and how they work, then this should be useful. Lots of people seem to like it anyway, and tend to use it in conjunction with the videos. Okay, so I've kind of waffled enough. I'll leave it there for today. Next video I'm going to make will also be on a more kind of basic topic, I hope, for those of you who are just kind of starting out with this kind of thing. Okay, any questions, give me a shout, stick them in the comment thread. Happy to help if I can, and I will see you again soon.